Chapter 181, Palace Talk, Rumors from the East. You mean you went to the East and back in a year, and even took part in a war? Bard turned his head at the question. Feely, who had been about to leave, came back over as well. That sounds a bit one-sided, Li Wei said. But it's not entirely wrong. All right. Gandalf lit his pipe and asked, Can you tell me exactly what happened over there? You were in that great war, weren't you? Bard pressed. Li Wei nodded. It's a complicated story. Do you remember LOTR, one of the Blue Wizards? LOTR. Gandalf frowned, trying to recall. Ah, right. I haven't heard that name in so long I almost forgot it. I never inquired much about the Far East. Is he doing well? Bard asked. Hard to say. Li Wei began recounting how LOTR had found him and followed on, how he had disrupted the East army's muster, returned to the Khanate to prepare its defenses, and how he and Sauron had confronted one another, with LOTR suffering some corruption. Gandalf and the others around the table listened closely, not wanting to miss any detail. He had a power to bewitch people's hearts, Li Wei said quietly. The king of the Khanate was controlled by him for years. Gandalf commented, Perhaps his intentions were good at first, but his methods, as you've said, were hardly righteous. He went astray, Li Wei admitted. Gandalf sighed, and then the notion of that bewitching magic nagged at him. Twisting minds with words and causing lifelong damage, it sounded a lot like the power of Saruman's voice. Li Wei reminded him, he learned it from Saruman. Gandalf bowed his head, lost in thought. Saruman should never have taught him that. It must be set right. It already has been, Li Wei said. The king of the Khanate has returned to himself. LOTR has sobered up and freed himself from Sauron's shadow. Good. I knew that with you there, it wouldn't end in disaster. Gandalf relaxed a little. He seemed to sympathize with LOTR's plight. The lands west of Mordor still contained many independent forces and room to maneuver against the shadow. The Far East was almost entirely hostile. Resistance work deep behind enemy lines, surrounded on all sides, would be unimaginably difficult. They were brave to try. Gandalf leaned forward. Let me guess, you used the Khanate as a base, helped defend their capital, and repelled that three-way coalition? You guessed half right. Everyone perked up. At that time, the king of the Khanate had come back to himself, and the Khanate had become our ally, so Mordor, the East Yi, the Khanate, Harad. Li Wei finished. I fought them all. Bard and Feely exchanged looks. The scale stunned them. Tens of thousands of enemy troops, Mordor's forces, East Yi cavalry and throwers, Haradrim and their war elephants, had been opposed. Bard thought back to the capture of Orktown days earlier, when 3,500 of the city's best-armed soldiers had been sent out. That force was formidable anywhere. But compared to the war in the Far East, it seemed small. Those well-armored soldiers might be devastating against goblins and the poorer Gundabad orcs, but Mordor's Uruk, the great Olog, and other giant beasts in that theater were no trivial opponents. The East Yi horsemen and Harad's mammoth war elephants made the picture even more desperate. Feely's wide eyes stopped blinking entirely, his mind struggling to process it. Both he and Bard silently concluded, if that coalition had attacked River Valley or the Lonely Mountain instead of the Connaught, it would have been far harder to hold. Even River Valley's massive, tens of meters high city wall might not have been enough. Oh, and the Ringwraiths took part too. Kamul and 3 others were there. One of them was killed by Felodon, which relieved some pressure for me. That removed any remaining doubt. A single Ringwraith's presence would crush ordinary morale. Bard finally understood why Li Wei had seemed so casual. He'd been through huge battles and didn't look down on the troops at Goblin Town out of arrogance so much as habit. Still, when Li Wei and the dwarves put plans forward, he adopted the most solid, meticulous methods. Haughty words, but serious action and thorough tactics. Unnoticed, Gandalf's pipe had gone out. He had been so absorbed that he hadn't refilled it. When Li Wei paused, he cleared his throat. Good, very good, he said. None of this surprises me, really. I thought you might settle down and focus on administration, but it seems I've underestimated your taste for adventure. LOTR and Felodon, Gandalf added after a moment, picking at his pipe. I hope both of them make it through. Considering the chance of more surprises, I'll ask, Gandalf said, leaning forward. Where do you plan to go next? Li Wei smiled. I want to go home. Roadside fort. I brought back a lot of new crop seeds from the east and the south. I just want to plant them. Sugarcane, cacti, grapes, sugar, paper, dyes, new crafts, wine, each was a new product to cultivate and a new livelihood to build. Chapter 182, Vigilance. Gandalf, long time no see. That night, a cluster of dwarves climbed the highlands above River Valley City and filed into the hall reserved for hospitality, coming together for an uncommon reunion. "Oh, I'm so glad to see you at a time like this," the white-bearded Balin said, embracing Gandalf. "You don't know how restless I've felt these past few days. I've been itching to go out and roam. A few days ago, I heard Li Wei was going to attack Orktown and even put on my armor, but my luck wasn't good. When we drew lots, I was the only one who got the stay behind." "That's a shame, Balin," Gandalf said after a moment's thought. "But once I finish what I'm busy with now, you can come on my next journey." "That's great," Balin brightened. "Hurry up, food's ready, and there's good wine Li Wei brought." Beaufort called, and the two made their way over. The hall quickly grew boisterous as more dwarves took their seats. Songs, laughter, and the frequent clink and clatter of drinking horns filled the air. Foam hung in the light as the dwarves' peculiar horns, vessels for wine that could also be blown after a drink, tapped together and sent out a brassy note. "Let me toast to your victory," Gandalf said, finding Li Wei in the crowd and raising his cup. Li Wei returned the toast and took a sip. "What are your plans for the near future?" Li Wei asked. Gandalf hesitated. He still felt the aftershocks of recent events in the east, particularly the matter of the blue robe. The strange magical cry he had heard and his near fall had set alarm bells ringing in his mind. Lowering his voice, he said, "I have a bad feeling about that business. I think perhaps Saruman may be involved." "Something tells me it's not over," Li Wei agreed. Gandalf's expression hardened. Over the years, he had largely endured Saruman's maneuvers in silence, avoiding confrontation so work could get done. When Lady Galadriel had urged him to lead the White Council, he had bowed out, saying he lacked the wisdom for such a burden. Saruman, eager to prove himself, had readily filled the post and let his pride grow with the office. That eagerness had hardened into a hunger for power and a tendency to dominate, and Gandalf had often looked the other way. But recent signs forced him to reconsider. "Now that I know a little, I cannot pretend I don't. I must watch Saruman more closely, even if I can only do so from the sidelines." "If you need anything, come to me," Li Wei said. His voice held respect. Among the wizards sent to Middle-earth to oppose Sauron, Gandalf's steady, gentle bearing inspired trust. Gandalf narrowed his eyes as he was about to reply, when a clatter from a nearby table interrupted them. Bard had toppled over, beer foam still on his lips. "Oh!" the dwarves cheered. "Winner, Bomber!" Clearly, once Li Wei had proven to be unassailable at drinking, the dwarves had chosen a new target, and someone paid the price. "I must get even," Bard muttered. Li Wei lugged a barrel over. "You've gotten my deputy drunk. What about tomorrow's work?" Gandalf watched the table devolve into merriment and shook his head. Despite himself, a small smile tugged at his lips. "It's not so bad," he said. "If this peace could last forever, that would be wonderful." Would it? No one could say. Early the next morning, Bard woke with his head pounding. He forced himself to tidy up and make his way to the palace conference hall. Compared to other regions, River Valley Town had relatively little unrest. The baseline for prosperity had already been set, and even with gaps in governance, the place continued to thrive. That very prosperity, however, posed different challenges. Maintaining growth and stability was easy enough. Pushing things forward was the hard part. When Bard arrived, he found Li Wei already at the table, poring over maps and having taken on several tasks overnight. "Have a glass of milk," Li Wei offered, pointing to a cup across the main seat. Bard swallowed it in one gulp. The headache and dizziness ebbed, and vigor returned to him. Much better. Bard felt the hangover fade and his muscles loosen. Li Wei got straight to the point. "I see room to expand agriculture. We have enough wheat and potatoes. We should plant something else. What do you propose?" "Sugarcane. Grapes." Li Wei rose and led Bard past the banquet hall where some dwarves still snored. Outside the city, in the golden wheat fields, they broke fresh soil and set the first grapevines into the newly tilled ground, erecting trellises. That year, the River Valley welcomed two new crops, grapes and sugarcane. Not long after, white sugar began to appear in the market and in every household, becoming an everyday seasoning. Bakers and innkeepers experimented with sweet pastries and refined recipes. Paper production also increased, making record-keeping and learning more accessible. Foreign traders and travelers might be surprised by the innovations, but none were as astonished as the folk of Dorwinion. "Are those our grapes?" someone exclaimed. "When did they plant so many?" Chapter 183, The Eagle King. Dorwinion cultivated grapes on a large scale for one very simple reason. The terrain and climate were perfect for it. The traveling merchants from Dorwinion could not understand how the towns here produced such high-quality grapes. After asking around, some of them heard the same rumor. The Lord found grape seeds while traveling east and brought them back to plant. It's even recorded in the Dorwinion Chronicles. Newcomers from Dorwinion discussed it seriously. "Who is their lord?" "Li Wei." "That name sounds familiar. I heard it at the port. People returning from the east mentioned him." "The legendary Shadow of War." Wait, could it be the same person? Who would expect a capable lord to leave his lands and roam around adventuring every day? If Bard or the project managers at Roadside Fort heard that, they would surely be exasperated. Today, Li Wei was not in his territory. He was not out sightseeing either. "The scale of this road is impressive. It will become a strong barrier for the free forces in the north," he said as he rode along the Sky Road. High on the Sky Road, Li Wei and Gandalf rode their horses slowly along the right-hand edge. Gandalf leaned over the railing and looked down. "They picked the location cleverly," he said. "Looking north, you can see where the Woodland Realm Palace lies, yet this road doesn't intrude on their domain or pry into their privacy," Gandalf continued. "The tall trees, with red and green leaves growing in the Woodland Realm, block the view of anyone with ill intent, and in sunlight or moonlight, those who simply want to admire the scenery are satisfied." Sunlight shimmered off glossy red leaves. From the bridge, the sea of trees stretched away in an indescribable panorama. Li Wei stopped and simply looked, then said, "This is exactly what I wanted. The first time I saw this, more beautiful than any painting, I felt everyone should see it," he added. "So the plan for this road was born." Leaves rustled in a continuous, interwoven symphony. Both men felt a rare inner calm. "Here there's beauty every season, spring, summer, autumn, winter," Gandalf said. "Agreed," Li Wei replied. Gandalf shook his head. "But the view to the south is different." To the north was a sea of crimson trees. To the south lay a dark, brooding mountain range called Emin Nu Fuin, also known as the Black Mountains. Its slopes were a dense fir forest under which a stubborn, primeval darkness lingered. The Black Mountains spoiled the scenery, but they also blocked the northward reach of Sauron's black magic from Dol Guldur. They provided cover for dark creatures, too. Orcs and giant spiders still lurked there, though the river valley's recent strength had kept them at bay. "The threat isn't great," Gandalf said, "but there are still hidden dangers. That's why I asked you to come with me." Li Wei explained his purpose: to meet the great eagles who lived in the Misty Mountains. The Sky Road passed not only by Orktown, but close to the peaks where the great eagles nested. Dismantling Orktown had been a clear benefit to the eagles. Fewer goblins came wandering up to harass their peaks. Still, the road itself might have disturbed the eagles' lives. "I think we have many common goals and chances for cooperation to discuss," Li Wei said. "I'm not familiar with the great eagles and have never spoken with them," he added, "but I believe with you here, our conversation will go much more smoothly." Gandalf smiled. "You underestimate your influence," he said. "The great eagles are no ordinary beasts. Whether it's the Eagle King or any of the others, they are wise and compassionate, and they are glad to help those who do good." Rather than say the goblins in Orktown disturbed the great eagles, it's more accurate to say the goblins were helpless against the eagles and could only get their own back by making trouble from afar, Gandalf continued. "They couldn't harm the eagles, so they harassed them instead." "In truth, I didn't need to come," Gandalf added. "Even if you had come alone, I doubt anything unpleasant would have happened." Li Wei knew this. His reputation among the great eagles already exceeded mere respect. What they lacked was communication. He had brought Gandalf along as a witness, and, he admitted, for the company. They had ridden fast from River Valley City at sunrise. By dusk, mountains rose before them. Near the pass, temporary buildings clustered, makeshift houses, rest facilities, and venues for frontline workers. Such complexes moved with the progress of construction, appearing wherever the road advanced. At the Sky Road's starting point, the flow of people and the need for facilities were obvious. Near the Misty Mountains, there was space to leave structures in place without hindering travel. Leeway had even designated this area as a new, habitable development zone. If development continued, a few prosperous small towns might grow up along the road. After settling their horses, the two walked a short distance north and began to climb. The Eagle's Nest was a chaotic tumble of giant rocks, a place normally accessible only by flight. That isolation explained why the great eagles feared neither goblin nor orc. No matter how clever or agile, they could only make noise or shout beneath the boulders. They could not penetrate the eagles' homes. As the climbable path ended and Leeway wondered whether they should switch to flying, two great eagles swooped down. They lifted Leeway and Gandalf and set them on a flat, massive slab at the peak. A gust of wind rolled across the stone. Then another great eagle descended more slowly, wearing a crown of gold, and inclined its head slightly toward Leeway in greeting. Its identity was obvious: the King of the Eagles, the Eagle King. Chapter 184, Aerial Vigilance. The Eagle King folded his massive wings and settled on a crag, studying the man before him with slow, careful attention. Great eagles are messengers of the Valar, guided by Manwë, Lord of Air and Winds, whose charge from Eru the Creator is to keep the world in balance. Their lives stretch as long as the elves, and they have watched more of history unfurl than most mortals can imagine. "I hope my building hasn't disturbed you," Leeway said without preamble. "You needn't worry," the Eagle King replied. "No one here has been disturbed, Legend Leeway." The Eagle King's tone was mild. Leeway was a curious figure, capable of making so many legends in so short a time, and yet there was something about him, his bearing toward life, that felt familiar to the old bird. It reminded the Eagle King, in part, of Gandalf. Before Gandalf came to Middle-earth, when he was known as Olorin, he wandered in a gray cloak, learning from what he saw, slipping among elves to advise them, planting ideas that would bloom later without the elflings ever knowing their origin. He sought nothing for it. To him, rewards were meaningless. The resemblance in temperament was striking, though not exact. Leeway had only been here a few years. Time would reveal more. "That's good," Leeway nodded. After a moment, he spoke again, to the point. "I've noticed a lot of hostile attention toward this road. Spiders and orcs near the Black Forest, and other enemies prowling the wilderness. Spiders tried to scale the decorative pillars of his road, but failed. The pillars were too tall and too smooth, and above the tree line the sun drove them back. Spiders were one thing. Far more worrying were the orcs and beasts that had fled Dol Guldur and gathered in the Black Mountains in Gundabad. Gundabad had been weakened by the Battle of 5 Armies, but it remained a stronghold connected to many creatures of the north. Even if Leeway cleared it once, it would be hard to keep it empty. He wanted precautions. "I know none can match the great eagles for eyesight," Leeway said. "If you see anything unusual, will you tell us?" The Eyrie sat on the eastern flank of the Misty Mountains, from where one could see the whole forest, the river valley, and even the peaks of the Lonely Mountain. Nothing moving in that sweep could easily escape an eagle's gaze. If the birds would keep watch, the region would be transparent to them. "That is no trouble," the Eagle King said with pride. "We have often brought news to friends nearby." Gandalf stepped forward. "The great eagles already aid the elves of Rivendell and Radagast in gathering intelligence. I have asked them for aid before. They never refuse. But the men of Rovanion," Gandalf's voice lowered as he addressed Leeway, "they are not much kinder to us. Some ignorant folk, afraid we might take their sheep, have let arrows fly at the eagles. Since then, there has been no talk between us and those humans." Leeway's mouth twitched. Those men of Rovanion, he thought of River Valley City and Long Lake Town, couldn't be blamed entirely. Mortals live shorter lives. Stories and warnings fade in a few generations. "I apologize for their thoughtlessness," he said. "It is done," the Eagle King answered. "We will keep watch. If anything of note occurs, you shall know." "And what would you take for that service?" Leeway asked. Have your people sheath their bows, the Eagle King replied unexpectedly. We wish no arrows shot at us. Li Wei understood at once. The legends about him had already begun to change the valley. I trust that under your watch and my rule, the men of the valley will not do such foolish things again, he said. I am glad past slights have not spoiled this meeting, Gandalf added. Under Gandalf's witness, Li Wei and the Eagle King came to an understanding. The rift between the great eagles and the northern men was mended, and with friendship restored, the eagles would once more have steady providers. Li Wei's lands would never lack meat and provisions. A small share would feed the eagle tribe. In return for such simple recompense, having the eagles serve as sentinels and to drive off aerial scouts like bat swarms was a bargain worth making. Li Wei looked around the eyrie and confessed it seemed plain. He would redecorate it. There must be a style they would like. As he flipped through designs in his mind, eager to begin, he and Gandalf spoke with the Eagle King about future work and small practicalities. Then the Eagle King lifted his head and stared north, utterly still. He held the pose a long moment. What is it? Gandalf asked. From Gundabad, the Eagle King warned. A host is moving, wild beasts and orcs, at least 1,000 of them, running down the mountain. Are they heading for River Valley City or Long Lake Town? Gandalf asked, looking to Li Wei. Li Wei rubbed his hands. It seemed almost brazen. Had the orcs gone mad with the loss of their leaders? But it made little sense. If they were aiming for those settlements, they would not take this road. This way led toward the Black Forest, where the wood elves would tear them apart. If they tried to push through the forest, the armies of River Valley would hardly need to move. The moment the orcs entered the trees, they would be cut to pieces by the elves. Whatever their intent, it was clear trouble was moving, and fast. Chapter 185, The Bjorns and Honey. You are not the only humans living in this region, the Eagle King reminded him. Gandalf slapped his forehead. Good grief, look at my memory. Li Wei, do you remember a few years back when we drove the orcs out of the Anduin Valley and helped evacuate the residents here? Of course I remember. That evacuation was where the Nemesis's reputation first spread among their enemies. At the time, the orcs hadn't yet understood who they were up against and still dared to stand and fight. Then you must also remember where those people went. Some wandered off and joined nearby kingdoms and settlements. Others followed my advice and moved north, gathering in the upper Anduin Valley. Gandalf stroked his beard. I happened to pass through there recently. They did listen. I found them grouped into a tribe. Recently, that tribe got a name. What? The Bayaun clan. Bjorn, that name rings a bell. Could it be Bjorn, the skin changer I know? That's him, Gandalf continued. At first, those folk had a hard time. They only survived by sticking together. They could no longer just run whenever orcs showed up. Not long after the Battle of the Five Armies, Bjorn's name spread. His deeds on the battlefield were remembered by some. About 3 months ago, I visited Bjorn. He told me how, when he returned from the Lonely Mountain and rumors about that battle spread, people began coming to his place asking him to lead them against the orcs. Back then, River Valley City hadn't yet started reconstruction, and Long Lake Town had only just moved. If things had been a little later, many of them might have looked to you for shelter. It's not too late, Li Wei said, and immediately strapped on his elytra. I'll be back in a moment. Swoosh! The familiar sound of wings and fireworks filled the air. Gandalf gawked as the figure took off. Back in a moment, he muttered. He never changes. 1 minute he's talking, the next he's already gone. The Eagle King looked equally bemused. This legendary lord was all impulse, decisive to a fault. And how did he fly? Did wings really sprout from his back? The thought baffled him. Let's go too, the Eagle King said. The Bayaun clan's forces are outnumbered. This could turn ugly. The Bayaun clan had only been formed a few years. Its members were brave and skilled, but they hadn't had time to develop fully before the war came. Gandalf didn't entirely agree that it would be a desperate fight, but he accepted the Eagle King's suggestion. With a powerful flap, the Eagle King spread his wings, swept Gandalf onto his back, and launched after the black figure. Everyone who can pick up a weapon, pick up a weapon. On the west side of the Black Forest, upstream in the Anduin Valley, Bjorn had gathered every able-bodied man and strong youth in the village and ordered them armed. Still, the numbers were small, only a few hundred. If they were equipped and trained like River Valley City's troops, a few hundred would be enough to rout an orc cavalry of over 1,000. But they weren't. They were poor. Not every place had the backing of some legendary lord. The Bayonne clan had only existed for a few years, and simply equipping every able man with a weapon was already a recent achievement, thanks to the Skyroad project. The construction team had opened a lift passage near the clan's settlement, an air or liftway that connected the two sides of the Black Forest. When Bard and Bjorn heard about it, they were astonished that such a large project would include a passage specifically serving the few thousand people of this small clan. The route proved useful. It improved trade and communication, delivering large quantities of honey and wild fruit to River Valley City and Long Lake Town. It wasn't kindness for its own sake, but it helped the clan all the same. Because of these improvements, the few hundred young men could each get a decent weapon. That was the limit of the village's armament over the past 2 years. Armor was another matter. Most wore makeshift leather pieces they'd crafted themselves. After rallying the fighting men, Bjorn delivered a short pre-battle speech. As a formidable skin changer, his words were blunt and simple. "There isn't a coward among you called here today. If the orcs dare to come for us, if they come to steal what's ours, then we'll give them what they came for. We'll give them death." The clansmen roared, battle lust burning in their eyes. White mist rose from Bjorn's nostrils. Winter had come. It was that time of year when the orc raids usually started. Orcs weren't the sort to quietly store food and steward land. As he thought that, a dark shape streaked through the air and plunged into a small nearby pond with a splash. "Who?" Li Wei climbed out of the icy water and donned his armor as if he weren't feeling the cold at all. "Good thing it hasn't frozen yet," he said, then added awkwardly, "Good afternoon." Bjorn stared at him for a long moment, unable to quite take in the sight of the legendary figure diving into a pond and emerging ready for war. He gave up trying to understand Li Wei's oddities and instead spoke plainly. "You've come at an inconvenient time. We have a war to fight. The attackers are orcs from the northern Misty Mountains. They've come to raid us." Bjorn didn't hide anything from a friendly legendary. He told Li Wei everything he knew. "They're arrogant fools. Count me in." Li Wei patted the sword at his waist. "Then, please." Bjorn had wanted to say, "Please take care of yourself." If anything happened to Li Wei, it would be a huge problem. But then he thought back to the last battle. Facing goblins, it seemed more likely Bjorn might be cut down in his giant bear form than Li Wei getting seriously hurt in a fight of this scale. He changed his words mid-sentence. "Please don't refuse our thanks." "Of course, I wouldn't mind taking back a few souvenirs," Li Wei replied with a grin. But his attention wasn't on the pleasant exchange or on the upcoming skirmish. His gaze had drifted to the large beehives by Bjorn's hall. These bees weren't ordinary. Each hive was home to bees so large that the dwarves had been startled when they first saw them. Because he had little need for honey, Li Wei had mostly ignored bees in the past. But honey was useful. Like milk, anything Li Wei produced had special properties. Milk cleared all buffs, both positive and negative. Honey was different. It specifically dispelled poison without removing other effects. And compared to milk, honey had another advantage. It stacked. One inventory slot could hold 16 bottles, which was the equivalent of 16 powerful antidotes. If he took a few stacks with him on future trips, even if he encountered ringwraiths and whatever hoarse screams they might use to inflict poison, he would be safe. "I do have something I want." Thanks to bookfriend 223116518AB for the 100 reading coins, and thanks to everyone who voted and supported me. Chapter 186, The Battle of the Bjorns. Hearing Li Wei say that, Bjorn felt a little more at ease. If they wanted something from his people, it meant his clan had value, a basis for a long-term partnership. Still, Bjorn was puzzled. "I don't see what my little clan could offer that would be of use to you." "Most of what you do is at home. I'm particularly interested in your beekeeping techniques," Li Wei said. "Beekeeping?" Bjorn stared for a few seconds, not expecting that. "It's not a secret. My bees are a little different, and the way we raise them isn't the same as other places." He was still speaking when a commotion rose outside the village. Beast cries rolled through the settlement like thunder. "They're here!" Bjorn turned to Leeway. "I accept. We'll talk more later." "Let them learn that the new clan in Anduin Valley isn't an easy target to be looted," Leeway called. "Prepare for battle." The hunters raised longbows and the militiamen gripped crude spears and axes. "Fire!" A volley of arrows flew. Dozens of wargs were cut down, their orc riders hurled from their mounts and skidding across the frozen earth. Those who survived scrambled to their feet, brandishing cleavers and clubs as they pushed on. A second volley felled more vanguards, and the orc force surged forward. With a war cry, the cavalry came at the village line, blades raised and faces twisted with hunger. The militiamen, many in no more than leather and padded cloth, braced to meet them. A thunderous roar split the air. Bjorn leaped from his high platform and in an instant became a massive bear, fur and hide as thick as armor. He met spears and blades head-on and swatted aside the leading orcs as if they were dry leaves. His presence bolstered the defenders. Villagers gripped their weapons and charged, fighting with a courage born of desperation. Under Bjorn's onslaught, the orcs' momentum faltered, even though they far outnumbered the defenders. Suddenly, a hunter pulling his bow gasped and collapsed, clutching his back in pain. An orc who'd crept up raised a spiked club to finish him. Clang! A sword of bright blue flashed in the orc's path, blocking the blow. The orc spun, eyes furious, then froze. Leeway's voice cut through the chaos. "A new clan needs training. Yes, but I won't stand by and watch a warrior die needlessly." The orc panicked and tried to run. Whoosh! An arrow struck the back of his neck, and his body went limp and crashed to the ground. It wasn't Leeway's arrow. Leeway turned and saw the hunter he had just saved had already risen, drawn his bow, and fired the killing shot. He bowed briefly to Leeway and then plunged back into the fight as if nothing had happened, his wound not slowing him. "Ignore the bear. There aren't many of them. Raid the rear," the orc chieftain ordered, abandoning a direct assault on Bjorn. If they couldn't take the bear, they would plunder the village. The wargs tore off toward the weaker houses at the back, riders shouting as they closed in. Bjorn didn't flinch. He kept slaughtering the attackers before him. The orc chieftain cursed, delighted at the chance to split the defenders, and led most of his force around the village. The clan soldiers, now steadied by the first clash, met the renewed charge with fierce determination. The first fear of battle had been burned away. But the orcs were many, and the fight was far from decided. Then the wargs suddenly threw back their heads and let out panicked howls, stopping so abruptly that some riders were nearly unseated. "What is?" The chieftain looked up, following their gaze, and saw a dark figure appear on the right flank, someone pulling a sword from the head of an orc stuck in the ground, then throwing back a wide linen cloak to reveal armor and face. Leeway's eyes locked on the chieftain. "Found him," he said. The chieftain stiffened, a cold shiver running through him. The warg beneath him took a nervous step back. What is he doing here? Why didn't he come sooner? Panic spread among the orcs as they watched the shadowed man. "Kill!" the chieftain still shouted, but his force wavered. Seizing the moment of hesitation, the Bayonne clan surged forward. The orcs, unnerved by the dark figure and losing their commander's clear authority, kept glancing back, fearful of a sudden rush. They began to ignore the clan soldiers directly before them. Then the sky answered with a tremendous cry. The Eagle King, arriving late with Gandalf, swooped low. His talons raked through a cluster of orcs, scattering them. Gandalf leaped from the eagle's back into the writhing mass, raising his staff. A blinding white light flared from the staff as he drove it through enemy spears, clearing a path without so much as a tear in his robes. Leeway surged through that opening and with a single decisive stroke cut down the orc chieftain. Without their leader, the orcs and wargs fell into disorder. Their charge collapsed into flight. The village hunters and warriors pressed the advantage and rapidly finished them off. Bjorn, still massive and roaring, ran through the field. As he moved, his form shrank, the enormous bear folding back into the man beneath it. Flesh and fur receded until Bjorn stood again at just over 2 meters tall, breathing hard as the battle ended. Chapter 187. Consider. After dressing and giving a few simple orders for his people to clear the battlefield, Bjorn walked over to where Li Wei, the Eagle King, and Gandalf stood, looking a little bewildered. I didn't expect such a small skirmish would draw the lords of the Free City States, the King of Birds, and a wizard out here to investigate. It's overwhelming, Li Wei admitted. We were discussing matters up at the Eagle's Nest when the commotion started. Gandalf said, stepping forward. The Eagle King noticed it first. Then Li Wei came rushing over, leaving us all behind. He tapped an orc corpse with his staff and moved it aside to clear the path. I imagine the orcs now know the new clan in the Anduin Valley is not to be trifled with. The ground around them was full of proof. The Baoun clan's settlement was returning to calm as residents began to dispose of orc and warg bodies. Bjorn had a wooden table brought out and set it in the courtyard next to the hall. With the Eagle King present, it felt wrong to seat guests indoors and leave a monarch standing outside. Li Wei waved him off. No need for ceremony. We just saw trouble and helped. What you did is more than helped, Bjorn replied. He glanced up at the faint outline of the sky road arcing away through the trees. That road has brought us wealth, and whatever support it's brought is real. Let's continue our pre-war discussion, Gandalf suggested. If there's anything you need, we'll do what we can. There's nothing special. You've already done enough, Bjorn said. Li Wei thought a moment, recalling reports he had seen in Long Lake Town's mayoral office. Besides, you've done more than enough already. When the road reached the Baoun lands, your clan accepted the duty of keeping it open from the Black Forest to the Misty Mountains. That benefits everyone. Oh, and the beehives, those giant bees. I'd like to take some back to raise. Bjorn laughed. You may. We already spoke about it. Where would you like them sent? I'll arrange it, Bjorn warned. The bees' habits differ subtly from other breeds. I can tell you the precautions as you go. No worries. I have a few special methods, Li Wei said with a confident grin. Bjorn nodded and dropped the lecture he'd been about to give. Perhaps Li Wei did have techniques like Radagast the Brown, the wizard who loved animals and could get along with both the fierce and the tame. Very well. I trust you. I suppose the beekeeping manual I've been writing won't be needed then. He sounded half amused, half regretful. It would have been one of the few things I could have taught you. Lessons? Li Wei's voice was light, but a chill of awkwardness passed through him. He quickly shifted topics. It's getting late. Time to eat. At sunset, a fire was built in the courtyard. The Eagle King landed nearby and proceeded to devour the fresh meat Li Wei had brought with great relish. Even Gandalf, who had never seemed tempted by ordinary camp fare, cast longing looks at those clean, perpetually fresh steaks, but Li Wei kept them to himself. If you think your teeth are good enough, you can try, Li Wei offered teasingly. Li Wei set a basket of Bjorn's special honey cakes on the table, along with wild fruits, vegetables, and dairy. He began to show off a little as he cooked. Soon, a plate of roasted meat sat before Gandalf, and at the rim lay a slice of raw beef, marbled and ruby red, almost jade-like in its grain. Gandalf, curious, broke off a small piece, chewed and swallowed. It's rather flavorless, but not unpleasant, he commented. Li Wei smiled, recalling his own early days of rough travel. I've had to eat raw meat in desperate times, he said. It's risky. Sometimes it upsets the stomach, and chicken is especially ill-advised raw. Gandalf nodded at that and turned to the vegetable leaf Bjorn was munching on. He took a bite and fell uncharacteristically silent for several seconds. The contrast between one man who favored raw meat and another who preferred greens was almost amusing. But Bjorn's honey cake quickly won them both over. It was rich and satisfying, something like a milder lembas that gave surprising sustenance for its size. Li Wei chewed thoughtfully. This cake would make excellent travel rations, better, he felt, than jerky or roasted meat. Bjorn noticed the change in his expression and said, This cake is a closely held secret of our clan. You're the exception. Promise you won't spread the recipe carelessly, and I'll teach you how to make it. With the greatest pleasure, Li Wei replied. Even though he'd already unlocked the basic technique during his time at Bjorn's house, he was eager to learn more. The trip had been fruitful, a recipe for Bjorn's honey cake and a large beehive. The hive was full of bees, but when Li Wei left, he took only 2. 2 would be enough. The rest could be left to the land's peculiar magical ways of replenishing itself. Before they parted, Bjorn looked as if he might speak, then stopped himself several times. Finally, Li Wei asked gently, "Is something wrong?" Bjorn stared down the wide road that cut through the forest and the river valleys before diving into the misty mountains, thinking about the wonders inside Li Wei's territory and the rumors of people being drawn to him. Hesitation softened his usually resolute face. No, it's nothing," he said, then sighed. "Please give me some time to consider." "Consider?" Li Wei repeated, waiting. Bjorn blinked, then forced a small, rugged smile. "Yes, I'll tell you when I've decided." He nodded once, and with that they took their leave, agreements made, questions left for later, and the road between them already carrying new ties. Chapter 188, Sleep. As Li Wei had said, people still had plenty of time to live freely, at least in the northern reaches of Middle-earth, for now, far from the shadow of Mordor. The weather that day was clear. Men and dwarves hammered and shouted along the misty mountains. The winding mouths of Orktown were being sealed one by one, transformed into smooth roads and stable walls. A massive tunnel was being carved through the mountain, unprecedented in scale. Its chambers rivaled, even surpassed, the great halls of Erebor. Many dwarves paused on their journeys just to stare, feelings of awe, joys, and something like homesickness mingling on their faces. "Good thing it's just a road, a passage," a dwarf muttered as he moved on. The remark wasn't entirely true. Lanterns hanging from the tunnel walls and on the domed ceiling shed light and warmth, but the cavern was simply too vast for ordinary torches to do the job. That was where dwarven craft came in. Their old techniques mixed luminous stones with building materials so a hall could be made to glow from dome to floor without extra lamps. Luminous masonry, hidden shafts of light, the dwarves had solved virtually every underground lighting problem. According to some elders, parts of Moria had been so well lit that crops could be grown there. Thousands of years ago, even with the exits sealed against Sauron's assaults, the dwarves had maintained a degree of self-sufficiency. There was always a way. Thanks to those skills, Li Wei felt a quiet relief. If tunnel lighting ever became a headache for him, he hadn't seriously intended to exhume 100 chests of glowstone from the nether, even if he could have. At Roadside Fort, a few clouds drifted across an open azure sky. The sunlight that season wasn't fierce and golden like summer, nor thin and pale like full winter. It was simply bright and clear. A rumble, the city gate swung wide, and a commotion spilled out into the road. Perched on a Malorn, Little Pink rolled over in bored fashion, blinked at the glaring sun, then turned its small head toward the gate. The little dragon froze at the sight, rubbing its eyes as if it had stared at the sun too long. When the figure at the gate waved to disperse the gathered townsfolk and walked away toward the castle, Little Pink sprang into action. It leaped from the Malorn, spread its wings, glided down, and landed squarely in Li Wei's arms, with an audible clang as its dragon head bumped him. "You really don't feel pain, do you?" Li Wei grimaced, rubbing the dragon's skull and sending it off to play. He touched his breastplate twice. That long-distance dive might well have cost him some HP. Without knockback resistance, he might have been knocked flat. Little Pink had grown noticeably since the last time, several times the size of its old playmate, Big Yellow Dog, almost pig-sized now. Growing up was good, of course, but it changed things. When it was tiny, crashing into someone's arms could be called acting spoiled. At this size, it was closer to a dragon charging. The beacon's light still cut into the sky. Feeling the day's pulse inside him, Li Wei pushed open the castle gate that hadn't been used in a while, padded across the wool carpet, and flopped into the simple seat before the beacon. There was no lordly bearing, more a portrait of laziness. Not even in bed or at night, just leaning back in the not very comfortable main chair of the castle, listening to the bustle outside, he let his eyes close. His breathing soon slowed into an even rhythm. Outside the wall, Little Pink nosed toward the hall, then settled against the stones and narrowed its eyes, keeping its movements small. At first light the next morning, the fort came alive. Households finished breakfast and went to work as usual. Tradespeople and craftsmen set out through the streets, chatting and laughing in a leisurely way. Homemakers planned the day's meals as well-dressed children walked off to school with their satchels. From the new training ground came the thud of synchronized feet. Several wanderers stood at the edge of the formation, discussing drills, then slipped into the ranks to guide the soldiers one by one. On hearing the Lord's return, Old Village Chief Veed, the community's first representative, came up to the castle gate carrying some documents. Tabor, Roadside Fort's headmaster, accompanied him. As they reached the gate, their path was blocked by a small, stubborn dragon. Both men stared at Little Pink, who planted itself firmly in front of them and refused to move. The sight left the two elders helpless. "We've come to deliver some documents to Lord Li Wei, an overview of Roadside Fort's recent development," Veed said, addressing the little dragon out of habit. They weren't sure how much Little Pink understood, but the explanation had to be made. Little Pink's vocabulary didn't extend far. It instinctively wanted to bark a warning like a dog, but Li Wei had scolded it for barking so much, so the dragon settled for shaking its head emphatically. Veed and Tabor exchanged glances and nodded at Little Pink, hoping the gesture would get them past. Little Pink only shook its head harder. The two men kept nodding. Little Pink kept shaking. For a ridiculous minute, the two elders and the dragon were locked in a silent nod-and-shake stalemate. The castle gate clattered open, and Li Wei stepped out, stretching. He took in the scene, Veed and Tabor staring as if the entire town had adopted a new custom, and asked, "No, Lord, we're here to deliver documents," Veed blurted, his face reddening. He hurriedly handed the papers over. In the months since, Veed had even learned to write properly. He no longer had to keep every detail in his head. Seeing Li Wei awake, Little Pink's head drooped for a moment, then it brightened and darted toward the dining hall. Li Wei let it go. The creature hadn't eaten in hours, and he wasn't about to let it starve. Li Wei slid the documents into his backpack. Compared to Rivertown, Roadside Fort had very little that needed handling. The pile of paperwork Veed offered was barely worth calling work. After confirming there was nothing of consequence, the two elders left, one back to the school, the other to the farm. The Roadside Fort was still new, but its population was climbing steadily. There were enough people now to form a proper force, so they built barracks. On the training ground, the recruits drilled with a discipline that was almost startling. No one was distracted or looking around. Their bearing was razor sharp. Li Wei's arrival was first noticed by a wanderer who happened to be resting. He called out a greeting, and the others looked up. At a signal from a wanderer instructor, the soldiers instantly halted, fell into neat ranks, rose to attention, and stood motionless like statues. Li Wei stepped forward. The man at the back of the line immediately pivoted aside in a practiced motion, opening a clear path. The soldiers to either side slid aside. Those behind resumed their places once his passage was confirmed. The movement was fluid and coordinated. Li Wei reached the front without a single wrinkle in the formation. He watched them for a moment and nodded appreciatively. "How is it?" a wanderer instructor asked. "Very good," Li Wei said. It was the kind of discipline he expected from elves, meticulous and efficient. The wanderers had taught well. "But appearances alone aren't everything," the younger instructor said. "Why not test them? Some of these recruits are quick learners." Li Wei's interest was piqued. He picked a steel sword from a nearby rack and smiled. "Let me see, then." The young instructor turned toward the ranks and called, "Who wants to spar with our Lord?" 100 hands, or rather 100 bodies, moved forward as one. The synchronization was perfect. Not a soul hesitated. The instructor nodded with approval. "Good. Even facing an unbeatable opponent, none of you flinched. That courage must hold when the enemy is real." The soldiers squared their shoulders and said nothing, but their resolve showed plainly. "Don't hold back," a wanderer warned Li Wei. "We taught them everything without reservation. They know basic techniques. You can strike freely." Li Wei felt a small unease. The recruits had training. He had not. For him, combat had always meant two things, life or death. His actions were designed to end a fight quickly. Either an opponent could survive his hits, meaning they could trade blows, or they couldn't, and they died. He thought about sparring. Formal skill duels were rare for him, only once against a wight, once against a Balrog. Experience had taught him to rely on evasion, blocks, and disarms when he needed to restrain himself. With that mindset, these are our people. A few wounds won't matter. He stepped forward to face the recruit reputed to be the quickest to learn. The young soldier bowed, his arm trembling slightly. Excitement, reverence, and fear flickered across his face. "Come on," Li Wei said quietly. The soldier lunged. Metal rang as Li Wei parried at an unexpected angle. The recruit's sword spun away, his attacking arm snapped off course, and he stumbled back. When he reset his stance, he was sweating, and a chill of realization crossed his face. The Lord had not moved much, had barely shifted, but in that instant, the recruit knew he had already lost. If this were a real battlefield and Li Wei a true enemy, he would have been pierced through and through long before he could react. He kept attacking, desperate and brave, but the outcome was the same. No opening, no real chance. He finally bowed his head and admitted defeat. "I lost." The Wanderer instructors murmured to each other, pleased. The others glanced, but no one was shocked by Li Wei's effortless control. To them, it was simply how their lord should be. What they didn't know was that Li Wei himself was a little surprised. He hadn't used any formal sword techniques in that exchange. It had been pure instinct, honed by countless battles. Watching the men, his thoughts drifted. Who among the great warriors of Middle-earth, not the instructors or generals who taught techniques, but those who had fought and killed in the thousands, had actually slain more enemies than him? Elven kings and seasoned dwarves had long lives and long track records. Gandalf and the other wizards were ancient. Many dwarves were centuries old and had killed legions. Falodan and other wanderers had spent years on the front line. Leaders like Bard, Thranduil, Dane, and the champions at the Battle of 5 Armies were masters in their own right. Compared to them, Li Wei might once have seemed unremarkable, but he had never stopped. The sword in his hand had never rested. War breeds skill, and he had been forged in it. Another recruit dropped his blade and admitted defeat, crestfallen. The observing instructor sighed, helped him up, and said, "If you want your lord to take you seriously, you'll have to work harder. Don't give him cause to be distracted next time." Li Wei realized he had unintentionally deflated some of the men. Clearing his throat, he resheathed the steel sword and addressed them more gently. "Very good. Compared to me, what you lack is real combat experience. When you first meet your enemies, you'll be nervous. I was the same. Keep training. When the day comes that you must use these weapons on the field, you'll do better than you think." Those few words did more than the sparring had. It wasn't what he said so much as who said it. The men stood taller, morale visibly lifted. A soldier who had been staring at him with burning curiosity seized his chance. "My lord, what was your first enemy like?" Li Wei paused, the memory coming back slowly. "A wight," he said. Chapter 190, Annotations. As soon as Li Wei spoke the name, the wanderers who had been listening straightened and looked over. As descendants of the kingdom of Arnor, they knew all too well the danger those creatures posed. The fall of Arnor had been partly blamed on the wights. Summoned by the Witch King, they practiced foul dark magics, were immune to ordinary steel and blows, and on the battlefield were almost unstoppable. Even the old Dunedain armies had found them terrifying. To face such foes on a first outing in Lev, no wonder the recruits were shaken. Wights? The new soldiers repeated the name and committed it to memory. Records of wights in this world were scarce. Mentions were mostly rumor or the sort of bedtime story parents used to frighten children. Very few had seen them, and even fewer had lived to tell it. A sharp-eyed recruit glanced at the Wanderer instructors. The instructors' reactions had been significant. Maybe they could be asked about it later. Li Wei waved them off. "All right, continue your duties. I won't keep you." He headed for the exit, the soldiers making way for him. After that round of inspection, Li Wei had a clear sense of the recruits' abilities. Even unpolished, they would make formidable fighters if deployed. Everyone who entered the barracks trained to the highest standards. Food and supplies were plentiful, and injured soldiers could be rushed to the beacons for rapid recovery. When death is not a constant threat, men train themselves to exhaustion. Under that system, people improved quickly. Seeing tangible progress day after day lit a fire in the soldiers. The relentless, limit-pushing training continued in the barracks. Li Wei continued his rounds and eventually passed near the school. Tabor had just left a class, lugging a tall stack of notebooks with difficulty, peering ahead to avoid bumping into anyone. A pair of hands reached out, relieved some of the weight, and only then did Tabor look up and see who was beside him. "I can take some of those, my lord," Li Wei said. "It's not that I can't carry them," Tabor replied. "This will make it easier." Li Wei took half the pile and walked with him, glancing at the covers. They weren't books so much as students' notebooks. "Do you have to carry this many every day?" he asked. "Yes, these are all the students' homework. I have to go back and correct them carefully." Li Wei opened the top notebook and skimmed as they walked. It was a basic grammar course with some arithmetic, practical, everyday knowledge. In most places, someone who could write coherently, do some arithmetic, and understand law could survive anywhere. In Roadside Fort, that was merely the foundation. He closed the notebook and asked, "Do students usually help you carry these?" Tabor nodded. "Normally one of them will come out to help me as soon as I step outside." "Then why didn't I see anyone today?" Tabor tilted his head. A row of small faces peered from a classroom window, bright-eyed and curious. Their gazes were full of intelligence and wonder, but also a little fear. "They're a bit shy," Tabor said. "Please understand, parents put their feelings into stories. Some children who've never met you imagine you as a mountain of a man, able to punch a dragon bigger than a castle," he added with a wry smile. Liwa covered his face with a hand. "Seeing me in person, they'll find I'm no different from anyone else." Tabor was quiet for a few moments, then shook his head slightly. When a person does one admirable thing, he's a hero. When he does one impossible thing after another and saves many people, he becomes a legend in some eyes, especially if he's rarely seen and shrouded in mystery. Miracles that are frequent and visible only deepen the awe. "You should spend more time with the children," Tabor said. "And with the townsfolk," Li Wei agreed. He had been away from the fort often. His absences were frequent enough that many only caught sight of him rarely. He still carried the small gift from River Valley City in his backpack. He hadn't opened it, and the box still took up a slot. They reached a smaller study where Tabor usually worked. They set down the notebooks and began correcting them. It was Li Wei's first time doing this kind of thing, but the lessons were basic and familiar enough. Between the education he'd had and the books he'd read during his long seclusion in Saruman's Orthanc Tower, plus the instincts that mysticism had given him, Li Wei had a knack for spotting patterns and explanations. His corrections and comments stood out, insightful, sometimes advanced, and often clearer than the usual notes. Tabor looked them over with undisguised admiration. "Many of these arithmetic methods and grammar approaches are quite advanced," Tabor murmured. "They're worth teaching in themselves." Still, Tabor fretted over one thing. If any child noticed a difficult sentence and asked what it meant, the follow-up explanations could be exhausting. Who knew how many questions a curious mind would raise? When they finished, Tabor set aside the notebooks Li Wei had corrected. He intended to keep them for a while, to think over a few of Li Wei's terse comments before returning the books to the students. In the past, children were always hungry and often had to help their families work. The whole family struggled just to survive, so there was no time for anything else. But now, we lack nothing, and children don't have to go through hardship so early. They can play, learn, and experience all sorts of interesting things to satisfy their curiosity, just like. Tabor hesitated for a long time, searching for the right words. "Just like a child," Li Wei supplied. Tabor blinked, stunned. That was it. Isn't this the ideal life for any child? A childhood filled with happiness from the start. "Just like a child," Tabor repeated. With their notes corrected and their immediate tasks finished, the two fell into a more relaxed conversation. They talked about recent events and teaching methods, about the school's grading system, for instance. The school at Roadside Fort was organized into 3 levels based on age and progress: elementary, intermediate, and advanced. Elementary covered basics and practical knowledge, arithmetic, literacy, general common sense, and the cultivation of decent habits. Intermediate began to introduce legal and literary knowledge. The advanced level built on the intermediate curriculum and allowed people to choose specific professions for more specialized training, aiming to produce professionals in various fields. This was still a preliminary plan. As the school grew, they would need to select professional teachers, compile textbooks, and refine the system. Time would prove what worked. After inspecting the short-term results of the newly established school and the barracks, Li Wei hurried to the agricultural planning zone to plant new crops. Buckets of water splashed into freshly dug trenches, the necessary environment for sugarcane. This variety of sugarcane needed water at its side, rather than planted directly in a waterfront, so Li Wei dug the rows and set the water channels at light speed. A large batch of sugarcane he'd brought back from the developed fields at River Valley City was set into the rows beside the water. After planting, he thoughtfully covered the ditches so no one would accidentally fall in. The residents now had another labor project. Next came grapes. Grape cultivation wasn't much different from other crops, except they needed trellises to climb in addition to moist soil. The crop diversity in the agricultural area was growing. Both sugarcane and grapes would change life west of the Misty Mountains. Sugar was an indispensable seasoning. Its sweetness alone would lift the residents' spirits. Grapes would add new daily food options and finally allow Roadside Fort to make wine and raisins. Dorwinian, Li Wei murmured, thinking of the famed wine of that land. In the wine cellar, he tasted the new brew, then a glass of Dorwinian wine. Both had merits. Dorwinian's centuries-old industry had weight behind it. The country had long been renowned for wine. For Li Wei, winemaking had begun as a curiosity enabled by the system's winemaking function, but for Dorwinian, it was a lifeblood. No wonder its products had won palates since the First Age. Leaving the wine, Li Wei moved to the southeast side of Roadside Fort, where the original blacksmith shop stood. From outside, it looked ordinary, just a few furnaces and an anvil, modest and almost abandoned next to the more striking structures around it. No one would guess that beneath it lay an enormous underground complex, gigantic smelting furnaces and forging platforms, rows of dormant dwarf steel furnaces, alchemy labs, and raw material cultivation areas capable of mass-producing potions when needed. This time, however, Li Wei wasn't concerned with alchemy or metallurgy. He grabbed his pickaxe and began digging down, opening another huge chamber, and then planted cacti. At first glance, cacti seemed useless, a source of dye, a potted ornament, or the occasional fuel. But under the game mechanics, they offered much more. Blocky cacti behave like several other game blocks. They destroy anything that drops onto them unless the object has its own entity, so they can act as a sort of automated disposal. But for Li Wei, they held another, far more valuable use: building experience farms. The farm idea relied on furnace mechanics. Smelting items in a furnace yields a small amount of experience. That experience stays stored in the furnace until you remove the smelted items. So if you keep feeding items in and let the smelted items flow out automatically, experience will accumulate indefinitely inside the furnace. When you want the experience, you stop the output, take out the most recently smelted item, and all the accumulated experience is granted at once. All you need is a simple 2-hopper setup, 1 hopper to feed the furnace and 1 to collect the output, and the process runs continuously. One furnace isn't extremely fast, but the system is automated and scalable. Build many, and the output multiplies. Experience freedom would no longer be a fantasy. With enough of these farms, the territory could enchant freely and equip everyone with strong enchanted gear. So how did cactus fit in? Cacti have strict growth rules. They must have empty space on all sides, or they will immediately break into dropped items when they try to grow. By placing a block above the cactus offset to one side, the plant will break itself as soon as it grows, dropping a cactus item. A simple water flow collection under this setup collects the drops automatically. By laying sand, planting cacti, and placing the obstructing block above, Li Wei could build a fully automated cactus farm without complex redstone machines, one of the few automation projects that could be done without advanced circuitry. Standing there as he worked, Li Wei felt a quiet satisfaction. It had taken effort, but finally there was a reliable, idle source of output. The Lord of Roadside Fort himself hadn't been seen that day, though he hadn't left the territory. Underground, Li Wei kept building cactus farms layer by layer. When he needed more space, he dug more. When he needed materials, he went back up to fetch them. With the cactus supply solved, one problem remained: fuel. That was easy too. Li Wei built a charcoal burner near the timber storage and connected the charcoal chest to the fuel input of the Deep Experience farms with a long line of hoppers. Logs for charcoal were supplied by the residents, making the system semi-automated. Now the furnaces could be kept burning. From that day on, every weapon in the territory could be enchanted by the Lord's magic. Every seasoned soldier would advance with the Lord's blessing. Experience freedom was no longer a distant hope, but a practical reality for Roadside Fort. Chapter 192. The storm time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, another year had passed. A white flash split the sky, briefly revealing the heavy, dark clouds. Thunder rolled. Rain slammed down in sheets, driven by fierce wind that lashed at the fields like a whip, trying to bend the fresh green shoots back into the mud. The long brewing storm had finally broken. Southern Bree region. An old man holding a lantern moved to the tightly shut window and listened to the constant drumming of the rain. He stared into the pitch-black night, worry plain on his face. A warm stove, hot water, a small rocking chair by the fire with a blanket folded on it. On a night like this, those comforts should have been enough. "Why aren't those two brats back yet?" he muttered, brow furrowed. "They knew it would rain and still went off fooling around. When they get home, I'll show them what that belt at my waist is for." He stood at the window, scowling as the rain grew heavier. Even as most of the candle on the table burned low, there was no sound from outside except the storm. Anger gave way to worry. He paced the room, restless. "I take back what I just said. If you come back now, I'll forgive you." The candle finally guttered out. "No, that won't do," he told the dark. At last, he sprang to action. He pulled on his coat and a hat that wouldn't soak through, opened the door, and stepped into the stinging, pea-sized rain, feeling his way along in the night. "Pete! Phil!" he called, but the storm swallowed his voice before it could travel. "Are you there? Answer me." Most of the village was already asleep. There were no other lights. The old man felt his way forward by touch and the vague outlines he could make out. For the sake of those two names he had called out, he left the warmth of his stove and pushed through the dark out of the village until he reached the edge of the small wood to the south. They ran this way, I remember. By then, the rain had eased a little, and his voice could carry farther, though it was hoarse. "Pete! Phil! Uncle!" A tearful shout answered him from his left, as if heaven had taken pity. He turned and saw two figures struggling through the rain, one wading laboriously through puddles, bearing another child on his back, who lay motionless as if asleep or worse. "Phil, what happened?" the old man called, quickening his pace. Phil stumbled forward, tears mixing with the rain. "We were exploring in the woods, and then a dark shape pounced on Pete. He just wouldn't wake up no matter what we did." The old man hurried over and took the child from Phil's back. He pressed his ear to Pete's chest. Only when he caught a faint, slow heartbeat did he feel some relief. He patted Phil's shoulder. "It's all right, lad. Pete's probably just exhausted. Come on, get back with me, dry off, warm by the stove. Everything will be fine in the morning." The reprimand he'd meant to give melted into comfort as he shepherded the collapsed boy and the sobbing child back toward the village. There were no more incidents on the way home. They reached the house safely. Inside, the old man relit the lantern, set Pete gently on the bed, and began drying him. "Pete, Pete," he called softly, trying to rouse him. Patting his face, shaking his shoulders, nothing. Pete's lips were a little blue, and his skin looked unwell. His mouth twitched as if crying for help. The old man frowned, and with no other remedy at hand, took out his pipe and lit it to steady his nerves. His hands trembled. "I've failed your parents," he whispered, fear rising in his chest as he watched the boy struggle in whatever dark state gripped him. There was a sudden knock at the door. "Hello, anyone in?" A youthful voice, lively and unfamiliar, called from outside. The old man set his pipe aside, silenced Phil's eager step toward the door with a raised hand, and peered through the crack. Two young people in cloaks stood huddled on the porch, soaked and shivering. "Could you let us in to take shelter from the rain?" one asked. "Please, the weather's too bad. We'll pay." The old man hesitated. He opened the door just a crack. "You look like those sneaky wilderness rangers," he said. "We're rangers," one replied, "but we act with integrity. Please believe us." "I haven't seen you before. Where are you from?" the old man asked. Roadside Fort, they answered in unison. Apprentice rangers from Roadside Fort. The name jogged his memory. Roadside Fort? Yes, the village chief bought a leather coat from a caravan that came from Roadside Fort last month. All right, come in. Thank you. The two bowed and stepped inside. The house was small but snug. Stove heat, familiar square wool blankets, a still rocking chair, and the lantern on the oak table. Forgive our intrusion, one said as they entered. There was no other light in the village. We were drawn to it. The old man nodded and watched as they accepted the towels Phil offered and began to dry themselves. We don't have any spare beds in the house, he warned. You'll have to sleep in chairs or on the carpet. That's fine, one of them said, shrugging. He peeled back his cloak to reveal a well-made steel sword at his hip and a wooden longbow slung behind him. A roof over our heads tonight is worth more than anything. Chapter 193, The Curse. The young ranger with clear eyes shrugged off his cloak and hung it aside, then casually squatted by the fireplace. Leave some room for me. The other man rubbed his hands together and shuffled over until he was almost pressed against the stove. Seeing how cold they both were, the old man fetched a few more logs and tossed them onto the coals. The renewed warmth dried the chill from their bodies. I'm a little homesick, one ranger murmured. Spineless, the other teased. They traded idle banter while the old man quietly dampened a fresh towel in warm water and began to wipe the pale face of the child still lying unconscious on the bed. The two rangers noticed at once. Sharing a look, one of them rose and went to examine the boy more closely. His eyelids twitched occasionally. His lips were purple, his cheeks ashen. He breathed, but barely. This is Pete, the old man said. He was fine yesterday. Today he went out in the rain, and he's been like this ever since. Looks like he's poisoned, one ranger said, though neither could name the exact ailment. They settled, half-joking, on poisoning as the most likely explanation. The ranger who had stood up felt along his belt and produced a small bottle of milk. Maybe this will help, he said, offering it. The old man blinked. Milk? Yes, special milk, given to us by the Lord. It cures poisons and illnesses. The word magic seemed absurd and yet hopeful. For ordinary folk, magic lived only in tales, but a miracle was still a miracle. The old man nodded and, without thinking logically, poured the milk into Pete's mouth. They waited. For a moment, the change was immediate. Pete's cheeks flushed with color, his lips lost their purple, and his breathing grew stronger. Oh my God, he's better, the old man cried, nearly in tears. Thank you, he stammered. You're welcome. It's what we should do, the ranger replied. But as the ranger spoke, a dark shadow flicked past the room. Pete's eyelids stilled mid-motion, his face drained of color again. The warmth vanished as fast as it had come. The old man froze. The two rangers exchanged worried looks. The milk failed? One muttered. It didn't fail, the other said, remembering a passage from the manual compiled by the Lord. It took effect, briefly. That suggests this isn't a simple poison. Something nearby is affecting him, a kind of beacon-like influence. Outside, lightning split the clouds and a jagged white streak tore across the sky. Phil, another child who had been watching from the corner, screamed and pointed at the window, trembling. What is that thing? He cried. One ranger drew his sword with a quick motion. The other followed his gaze. A hideous face had appeared at the pane, gaunt, greenish skin stretched over bone, empty eye sockets gleaming coldly. Below the skull, a cloud of dark shadow formed its body. A swollen, twisted hand struck the window frame with a hollow rap. A thin, stilted laugh crawled from its throat. Temperature seemed to drop in the room. A weight of dread settled on everyone inside. Get out, the ranger who'd drawn his sword barked and flung himself toward the window. In the flash of lightning, the face vanished. I think I know what this is, the other ranger said, grabbing his partner's shoulder to hold him back. Didn't you recognize it? What? A wight. The sword-bearer swallowed. A rush of resolve followed. Not to be underestimated, he said, but not to be feared. They shared a look, understanding enough. Fight. The old man, pale and shaking, tried to stop them. May luck follow your steps, he whispered as they fled into the rainy night without even bothering to grab their cloaks. The thunder rolled on. The village fell silent under an uncanny laughter that drifted through the streets. No lights were lit. No one dared move. Two figures chased the sound into the forest south of the village. Rain filled the trees and muffled their footsteps. "Where did it go?" one shouted. "I didn't see it." A shadow slid past a trunk. One ranger drew and loosed an arrow in an instant. Swish! The shaft flew through the darkness and lodged in a branch. "Don't," the other snapped. "Ordinary weapons won't touch them." The archer knocked the arrow again, then shook his head and sheathed his bow. He drew his longsword instead, and a faint, otherworldly sheen shimmered along the blade. "May the Lord bless us," they murmured together. A monstrous sound came from behind, a thunder of earth and snapping branches. The ground erupted where a long ditch ran. A withered shadow rose out, mud flinging from twisted limbs. A several-meter-tall wight hauled itself up and struck with a huge, gnarled hand. The two rangers rolled apart instinctively. A ringing clang filled the air as the blessed longsword met a ring of rotten bone around the wight's wrist. The weapon could touch the creature. Blessed steel did that, but the impact left their scalp buzzing. The wight's pressure was relentless. The young ranger whose sword had met the blow was driven back into a disadvantage. The wight's other hand bore down toward his throat. "Help me," he shouted. The other charged, sword driving into the thing's side. The wight staggered back, but the strike only left a shallow scratch along its arm. "It's as hard as an iron golem," he panted. "We're in trouble." Chapter 194, Little Sprouts Boom. Thunder rolled across the sky, and a flash of lightning briefly lit the whole forest, revealing the ghoul's tall, gaunt figure. The two rangers instinctively stepped back, faces tightening with regret. Clearly they'd bitten off more than they could chew. But there was no turning back now, only fight. A longsword sliced through the rain as one of them charged forward, swinging with everything he had. He traded blows with the ghoul, clang after clang, but each strike slid off the creature's iron-hard arm. This thing just deflected blades. The ghoul seemed to grow bored. It laughed, then suddenly lunged without warning, as if teleporting. Thud! The sound of a heavy blow rang out as the breastplate, one that in trials had cracked thick slabs of stone, took the impact and did its job. Even so, the ranger rolled across the wet ground, pain flaring through him as if his insides had been shaken loose. "Cough, not yet," he rasped. Whoosh! A flare shot up through the rain, tearing between leaves and branches into the sky and bursting into a shower of orange and red. It stood out starkly against the dark jungle. "Get away!" the other ranger shouted. He was a step late. He used his sword desperately to parry the ghoul's grasp, but how could human strength match a monster's? Soon both rangers were knocked down, each slamming into a tree. "I feel awful. I think I'm sick," the first muttered, his face drained of color, a pallor that even the night couldn't hide. Maybe he'd fall into the same endless sleep that had taken the village boy. "Pah!" The other spat mud from between his teeth, stood up, and shouted, "You haven't finished your milk, have you? Get it down, then run. I'll keep him off." Without waiting for an answer, he charged forward. "In the name of Lord Li Wei, I won't retreat a single step." Clang! His sword slammed into the ghoul's shriveled flesh, more a battering than a cut, and for a moment the monster staggered back. The ranger, surprised, felt for an instant as if the ghoul's aura had weakened after his battle cry, as if he might actually repel it. But the feeling passed. The ghoul glared around, enraged, then opened its long fingers and lunged. At the last instant, a small, old dagger arced in from an unexpected angle and buried itself in the ghoul's pitch-black, semi-ethereal body. A scream tore through the rain, high and raw. "Courage is the sharp blade that cuts through fear," called a voice. A man in a dark green robe drew an ancient-looking longsword and surged through the downpour. His presence, the speed of a leopard, the force of a tiger, etched itself into the two rangers' memories. Each measured stroke forced the ghoul back. Several blows sheared away its burial ornaments, and the darkness clinging to its form thinned, becoming almost transparent under the beating. The faint glow in the ghoul's eyes flared red with rising fury. It swung an iron bar arm, but the newcomer's blade, moving with a weight beyond its size, batted the arm aside like a hammer. Heat rose for a moment, only to be snuffed by the rain. The ghoul, an embodiment of dread, felt panic for the first time. Darkness that held its shape began to dissipate, while the stranger showed no wound and no fatigue. Whoosh! The ghoul flickered and retreated deeper into the trees. It was a tactical withdrawal. A flare streaked out horizontally, trailing white particles and striking the ghoul with a series of small explosions. The shockwave knocked the creature off balance. Though the explosions themselves, not magical, didn't harm it, the force disrupted its motion. The stranger closed in behind it. Cough, cough, came a choked voice. It all happened in a blink. The ranger who had been on the ground gulped down a bottle of milk and pushed himself upright, squinting after the spot where the man and the ghoul had vanished. Who was that? That poised figure, the confident stride, the flawless sword work, and the boldness to pursue the monster. Could it be Lord himself? They brightened at the thought, but the rain and their battered bodies quickly doused that excitement. No, the Lord wouldn't be that weak. If he were here, I'm sure the ghoul wouldn't last 2 strikes. True, but if Lord had shown up, the ghoul might have fled right away. Right. This time there was no argument. Their thoughts matched. You two have time to argue? Are you still hurt? A voice said. Plop. A weight settled on both their shoulders. A pair of hands had quietly grabbed them from behind, firm, competent. The two shivered and spun around to see the man who had been chasing the ghoul standing there, unexpectedly close. He pulled back his hood to reveal a weathered face. You were lucky. Thank you for the save. The rangers snapped to attention and saluted. Sir, don't thank me. Check yourselves for wounds and lingering toxins first. It's fine if you finished your milk, but if you're lucky you might find a roadside weed called a Sarah's that can help counter a ghoul's poison and curse. He crouched and plucked a curled-tipped grass from beside a tree root. It looks like this. Do you two little sprouts from Roadside Fort remember it? Little sprouts. At that name, the two straightened, ears perked. Wasn't that what the Wanderer instructors called new recruits? May I ask who you are? One blurted. Followed on, just a wanderer, the man answered. Relief washed over them. They straightened, a little guilty at having mistook him for someone else. We meant no disrespect, instructor, they chorused. Followed and waved a hand for them to relax, then added, Also, your fighting technique needs work. Did you forget that flares can be fired like crossbow bolts? They won't hurt things like ghouls, but the explosive property creates a strong knockback. Were you listening in barracks training? He asked, half scolding, half amused. Chapter 195, Newcomers Report. You two are the perfect example of slack off in peacetime, suffer in real combat. The Centenarian Ranger followed and lectured them earnestly. The two intern rangers stood silent, heads down. Next time you run into a white, don't act rashly if there are fewer than 5 of you. First, call for support nearby. Understood, they answered. Good. Followed and nodded, forgiven their recklessness for now. If I'm not mistaken, you two are supposed to report to the ranger outpost in the South Downs, right? Yes. Perfect. I'm heading back that way too. Come with me. Please wait a moment. Just as Followed On turned to lead the way, one of them stopped him. Could you stay a little longer? There's something else we haven't finished. What is it? It's about a child from the village. Only one house in the dark village still burned a candle. A hunched figure paced inside, glancing at the bed, then peering toward the door. As the candelabra's flame dwindled, 3 people arrived. 2 were the familiar interns. The third was new and left little impression. This is our instructor, the 2 said as they entered. Instructor? The old man asked. Yes, he teaches and trains us. The monster from earlier. My students and this instructor dealt with it. Don't worry, it won't come for Phil again. The old man's face lit up. That's wonderful, I knew it. You look like capable fighters. That thing wouldn't stand a chance. The 2 interns shifted uneasily while Followed and watched them in his usual silent way. Thank you, truly. Thank you both. The old man bowed and called into the house. Phil, fetch fresh towels for our guests. Have you eaten? There's fresh meat and vegetables in the cupboard and a few bottles of wine I've been saving. No need, one of the interns said. We just wanted to check on Phil. If he's better, we're in a hurry to be on our way. All right. The old man led them to the bed. The child Phil still lay unconscious, but his condition had clearly improved. What lingered was not life-threatening. Followed On crouched by the bed, then took out the athelas he had gathered and handed it to the old man. Dry this, then steep it in hot water. The scent will help dispel the lingering curse on the boy. I understand. The old man treated the herb with care, as if it were rare treasure. Having settled Phil, the three pulled on cloaks and hoods and made for the southeast through the rain. "That's odd," one intern said as they walked. "Why would a white attack a village? If whites did that all the time, wouldn't all of Bree be abandoned?" "Who knows?" the other mumbled. Faladin, who had been silent, finally spoke. "This village's location isn't very good. It's squeezed between the ancient tomb and the South Downs. Whites showing up here isn't unheard of." "Is it?" It wasn't entirely normal. Faladin reminded them and fell quiet. For decades, most whites had stuck to the Barrow Downs, rarely venturing near human settlements except the Old Forest, where some mysterious force would drive them away. Whites usually remained within their territories, unless something drove them. Driven by something, they were summoned by the Witch King's dark will. Typically, only the Witch King or other ringwraiths could command them directly. That was notable. The path from the village to the nearest South Downs outpost wasn't far. Soon, the three stood beneath a modest tree. The trapdoor creaked open to a descending passage. They climbed down after Faladin. "Wow," the two interns breathed when they landed. The square room, with its roadside fort-style pillars, warm glowstones, and familiar amenities, felt like home. "It's just like coming back." "Are these the two newcomers who were late?" a ranger asked as he approached. "Yes." The two, still a little disheveled, snapped to attention. "Roadside fort intern rangers reporting for duty." "Very spirited, but you don't look well." The ranger frowned. "Normally I should punish you for being late, but the weather is unpredictable, and it wasn't your fault. I'll let it slide this time." He cocked an eyebrow. "You two look injured. What happened?" "They were hurt by a white," Faladin explained. "A white," the ranger repeated, then softened. "I'm glad you came back alive, children, but you won't be able to take part in the upcoming operation like this. Go rest. There's an orc raid planned in a week. I expect to see you ready by then." "Yes." The ranger left after giving his orders. The interns relaxed, and Faladin pointed them toward the bunks. "You can rest over there. There's water and a little of roadside fort's wine. Don't drink too much, it won't heal wounds. Rest and recover for the battles ahead." "I wouldn't want leeway to come back and find the first batch of interns missing," Faladin added with a wry tone. If that happened, knowing him, he'd cut a path from the South Downs to the White Mountains himself. Watching the two impulsive young rangers, Faladin couldn't help but sigh. They had their lord's temperament, quick to rush into danger without question, but not his strength. Such raw recruits needed proper hardening lest their mistakes sprout worse troubles. Just as he was about to leave, two pairs of curious eyes blocked his path. "Instructor, are you very familiar with our lord?" the interns asked. "I suppose so. Why?" "We're curious. We haven't seen him for months. Where did he go?" Sigh. Thinking of Liwei's habit of leaving without notice, Faladin sighed again. Liwei never made a scene. He would simply say a few words, depart on a whim, and most people didn't know where he went. Couldn't he learn from other lords and hold a meeting before leaving? Explain his itinerary, hand out tasks, and take a few servants along? Probably not in his lifetime. Still, people in the territory had grown used to it. If a stranger asked, Faladin would be wary, but the young rangers were trustworthy. He answered with a tone part complaint, part resignation. He said there couldn't be such a thing as watermelon in the territory, dumped a pile of work on me, and ran off to the south. "That includes your internships," one of them said. "I hope he comes back soon. Otherwise, the road we're building will be delayed farther." "Everyone's waiting for him. Thanks to Hey Kid for the 15,000 reading coins reward. Thanks to Chen Xing CX for 100 points. Thanks to Yanchen Yinji, 497 for 100 reading coins. And thanks to everyone who voted and supported us." Chapter 196, Market Riot Boom. Thunder rolled as a heavy rain began to fall. "Your eyesight is truly sharp, my friend," said the vendor. In a small Haradrim town on the Harlan River Basin, south of Gondor, a wine merchant shouted his wares beneath a wide awning. Opposite him, a mysterious customer in a linen robe, wide-brimmed hat, and a wool scarf that hid most of his face gave a single nod and pointed to a barrel on the ground. The merchant hauled it to the counter. "This is the strongest barrel of date wine I have," he declared. "How do you know?" the merchant asked. "You haven't tasted or smelled it." "A secret," the man replied. After paying, Li Wei, masked by the robe and scarf, lifted the barrel with one hand, found a small unseen corner, and with a quiet slate tucked it into his backpack. He resumed strolling through the market empty-handed. A gust of wind drove the rain into the stalls and alleys. Unusual downpour, someone muttered. Most of the townsfolk had bronze skin, a regional feature. To the west lay the port of Umbar. To the east, the vast Great Harad Desert, larger even than Mordor. To the north, the Harlan River crossing led to Harland, a contested strip of land once called South Gondor. Once firmly Gondorian, Harland had fallen into dispute as Gondor's power waned and the Haradrim pressed in. Border guards from both sides were always watchful, and skirmishes were common. Li Wei had passed through the area on his way here. This market, built of dark stone and red clay tiles, smelled of fruit and spices foreign to the north. Lemons, dates, bananas, pomegranates, oranges, olives, goods he hadn't seen before, filled the stalls. Li Wei walked among them in the persona of a discerning traveling merchant, picking only what was worth taking. Nothing unpalatable would make it into his pack. "Where are the watermelons?" he asked at one fruit stall, scanning left and right. The owner blinked. "How come I don't see any watermelons?" Li Wei frowned. He'd heard of watermelon wine being sold here. The owner pointed behind him. Li Wei turned and found a pile of large, pale green patterned melons stacked on the ground. He picked one up, tapped it twice, then put his ear to the rind. Good thud, ripe. "How much for your melons?" he asked. 2 silver coins per caddy, the vendor replied. Li Wei paused. "Gold seeds? Silver rinds?" The vendor laughed and waved him off. "Buy or don't. There isn't another seller of watermelons in this whole market." "All right." Li Wei set the melon down and was just about to produce silver when a commotion erupted farther down the lane. A wooden wheel hit a stone with a clang, and the whole cart jolted. Eyes pierced the rain toward the sound. A prisoner cart rolled into the square, escorted by 7 or 8 soldiers. Inside slumped a man covered in blood, arrows lodged in his shoulder and leg. He was fair-skinned, wearing silver-white armor engraved with a tree and 7 stars, the White Tree of Gondor. A Gondorian general? Here? The cart stopped in front of the market. The soldiers spread out and tilted the cage so the crowd could see. One of the guards bellowed, "A day ago we won a great victory over Gondor. This is an enemy general, captured by us." The crowd exploded into cheers, throwing whatever they had at the cage. The man inside did not move. "Kill him! Kill him!" people shouted. One soldier raised a hand to calm them. "No, unfortunately we cannot kill him." "Why?" someone yelled. "Because he's already dead." The crowd roared again. Squeezed among them, Li Wei's hand slipped and the melon he'd been holding split open. He tore off a wedge and bit in. "You split my melon," the vendor cried. The fruit seller whirled and realized his fruit was gone. Li Wei dropped a handful of silver coins into his hands. The seller's frown melted into a smile as he scooped up the money without counting it. Better not to ask for change in this crowd. Li Wei finished the wedge, stuffed the rest into his pack, and pushed forward. Someone shoved at him in the crush. He met the man's glare from beneath his hood. The man flinched and stepped aside. The captive in the cage had an almost imperceptible pulse. He wasn't dead yet, but only barely. If nothing changed, he could die at any second. Li Wei's eyes narrowed. There was no time to waste. "Hey, you there!" one of the guards snapped. They had just announced their capture and were preparing to move the cart. The guard turned and pointed at the hooded stranger blocking their path. "Don't stand in the way. Move, or you'll have trouble." "Trouble?" Li Wei smiled. In the next instant, his long sword flashed free, briefly parting the falling rain, and his linen robe swung open to reveal dark armor beneath. The guard felt a chill run through him at the sight. Something in his chest tightened like an alarm bell. "Who are you?" he shouted. Other soldiers drew their weapons, tense and wary. The wind and rain tugged at Li Wei's hood, blowing up rumors already swirling among the people. A ruthless warrior from the east, who had cut down tens of thousands of Easterlings and orcs, toppled a Khan, slain the ringwraith aide called Eastern Shadow and other wraiths, single-handedly slain a Harad general and ripped apart a Mumak, an ominous shadow of war. Those whispered legends hovered in the soldiers' minds and overlapped with the figure now standing before them. Could it really be him? No, surely not. But a cold, absurd doubt had planted itself in their hearts. Blood ran across the sandstone road, rain washing it into the cracks. Damn foreigners! The last soldier snatched up his weapon and charged. Metal rang against metal. His wrist went numb, a white-hot pain shot through him, and he crumpled to the ground. Thorns 3. Anyone who makes a melee attack takes reflected damage. The final charging soldier fell silent. I don't kill civilians, the man said. True to his word, when all that remained were civilians, he sheathed his sword. Those words alone cowed several nearby people who had picked up makeshift weapons. The fruit vendor behind him, clutching a machete and apparently ready to try a sneak attack, froze. They were all civilians now, but if they swung those weapons, that would be something else. No one moved. Fear took hold. Silence broke into panicked screams. The market dissolved into chaos. People scattered in every direction, stumbling in the rain. The fruit vendor slipped, flopped to the ground, and scrambled back, trembling, not caring about mud or soaked clothes. He rose, screamed, and ran, only to trip 2 steps later and fall headfirst into his stall. Silver coins spilled onto the wet stones. Li Wei shook his head, walked to the overturned cage, snapped a couple of bars open, and hauled out the last regeneration potion he had. He tipped it down the Gondor general's throat. Slowly, the man's health rebounded. That bottle had been the last regeneration potion in his pack. Regeneration potions were rare. Brewing them required ghast tears dropped by ghasts, monsters that only spawn in the Nether and not very often. Whenever Li Wei ran out of those potions, he would have to camp in the Nether for a long time, without any guarantee of finding what he needed. Instant healing potions were far cheaper. They required glistering melon slices made from watermelon and gold nuggets. Their effect and total healing were weaker than a regeneration potions, but they worked instantly and were inexpensive. Now that he had watermelons, Li Wei could make plenty of instant healing potions in the future. Carrying the recovering Gondor general on his back, Li Wei grabbed a blanket from the market and draped it over the man. He retraced his steps, leaving a faint scent of blood in the air. Splash, 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 the rain and hurried footsteps kept time like a low drum. "You found him?" someone demanded. The commander of the Harlan River Basin arrived late. He took in the ruined market and the smashed prison cart, lips pressed into a furious line. Damn it, what happened here? A faint movement inside a smashed stall caught his eye. Stop, he roared, and the figure crawling from the fruit stand froze. 2 soldiers dragged the vendor before the commander. What happened here? The commander demanded. Under that pressure, the man could not lie. He shivered, pressed a hand to his chest, and stammered out the story. There was a terrible man in a blue robe. He stole the body of that Gondor prisoner. I heard he came from the east. And what else? The commander demanded, seizing the vendor by the head. He used magic. A soldier tried to slash him with a sword, but it was like the blow hit himself. He used magic to reflect attacks. That's all I know, really. The commander threw the man down. From the east, uses magic, robs people. It's that wizard again. A bunch of fools. The town's full of wanted posters for that wizard, and nobody recognized him, someone spat. The blue-robed archer who kidnapped our court archmage. Holding back his anger, the commander barked orders. Gather every available fighter in town. Warn the ferry guards. Let no one suspicious pass. We're going to capture that wizard. Commander, isn't that dangerous? His deputy said. I heard that wizard has all kinds of strange powers. Even our court archmage couldn't beat him. You have a point. The commander thought a moment and then decided, arm every soldier with a shield. They'll need something to defend against his magic and arrows. Can shields really stop those ice balls? The deputy muttered, skeptical. They say he can throw ice the size of pebbles. We'll see, the commander said. Do it. He stared toward the ferry crossing and muttered almost as if to himself, the black serpent will strangle the white tree. The black serpent was the emblem of the Haradrim and the Umbar pirates, serpents and scepters, Ouroboroi and coiled black snakes, symbols they wore proudly. The white tree, of course, was Gondor's emblem, descended from the one in the White City. To the commander, the phrase was a curse and a declaration both. The ferry crossing along the Harlan River was always tightly guarded against enemy infiltration. Today was no different, except that there were more soldiers and more urgency. Wanted posters plastered the palisades. The blue-robed wizard who kidnapped the court archmage and stole the Gondor prisoner. Beware. Skilled with bow and ice balls. Li Wei lingered on the riverbank where Haradrim soldiers gathered and listened to the rumors, a strange mixture of amusement and curiosity tightening his chest. Was that LOTR they were talking about? Had he been stealing prisoners too? What had happened to the court archmage? Was this the other blue-robed wizard, Parlando? The two of them had turned out very differently. One an advisor to a Khan, the other a court archmage in Harad. From the talk around the ferry, whatever had happened to Harad's wizard, it hadn't gone well. Brazenly, Li Wei carried the Gondor general away from the guarded ferry and slipped to another part of the riverbank. He quickly fashioned a small wooden boat, laid the still-sleeping general in the stern, took the bow, and pushed off, paddling north. He paddled at an easy, unhurried pace, thinking as the rain pattered. LOTR had been a good diversion. Perhaps that had been his plan all along, a foresight that drew attention away and made Li Wei's escape easy. Chapter 198, Captain. What does it have to do with me if you caught a blue-robe wizard? Li Wei snapped from the far side of the Harlan River, arguing with the patrols and feeling increasingly cornered. He couldn't get away. Harland was a disputed stretch. Gondor and Harad both claimed it, but this was still the Harlan Basin. The south bank was a string of Haradrim towns. The north bank served as a frequent landing for Umbar pirates. He'd thought that by keeping away from the ferry bridge he'd avoid trouble, but the patrols didn't even spare the approaches. Gondor's reach was thin this far from its heartlands, but the local commander had still ordered tight checks. By the commander's orders, everyone passing through must verify their identity and purpose. Make it quick. 3 sentences, clear and done, the soldier barked. I'm just a passerby, visiting my cousin, Li Wei said. Passing through to visit a cousin. The soldier gave him a hard look up and down. This area has nothing but garrisons and outposts. Who's your cousin? Where did your boat come from? Don't you know unauthorized river crossings are forbidden? And then pointedly, what's that wrapped in the blanket beside you? Is there someone inside? It's a baby, Li Wei blurted, forcing the most implausible smile he could. A big baby. He grew strong too fast. I'm taking him to his family. He hoisted the bundle a little higher, trying to make the hooded face within look harmless. The soldiers weren't convinced. A few men in the tents overheard and rushed out. Their expressions hardened. Whoever was in that blanket could be a corpse, or worse, evidence of murder. You're not even showing your face. Come with us. Seeing reinforcements closing in, Li Wei feigned resignation. Fine, I'll come. Then, in a flash, he bolted, faster than a rabbit, leaving the startled soldier to shout, "After him!" Dozens of soldiers spilled out of the camp, seizing weapons and giving chase. They pursued him for miles, relentless as hounds. It was clear they wouldn't stop until they'd run him down. Li Wei stopped briefly by the roadside, set the bundle down, and drew his longsword. Since when would a few dozen men dare lay hands on him? He wasn't about to endure humiliation. "This is your choice," he told the banners of soldiers behind him. Just as the garrison closed in and Li Wei prepared to throw off his disguise and finish things fast, a sharp 3-note owl call split the air from a nearby tree. Barn owl calls, used by Gondor rangers. Surprised, he turned and saw a nondescript oak standing among the dry brush. 3 small native Haradrim flowers at its base formed a neat triangle. A ranger sign. Li Wei gave a quick hand signal, "Don't worry," and charged straight for the cluster of pursuing men. Behind the tree, one ranger couldn't hold back. "Don't go. Don't throw your life away. We can still hide." "No need," came a clipped reply from farther off. The ranger hesitated, then grabbed the blanket and dragged the figure toward a ladder leading down. As a corner of the fabric slipped, his eyes widened. "Captain?" There was no response from inside. The ranger glanced between the limp figure and the distant silhouette of the man who'd signaled them. Then, gritting his teeth, pulled the captain down into the earth. Below, 3 rangers crowded around the blanket. "Is that the captain?" one whispered. "He's alive," another breathed. Someone checked his wounds in disbelief. "Every wound seems healed. His breathing is steady. By the gods, this is a miracle. When the captain was ambushed by those scoundrel Haradrim yesterday, I thought we'd lost him," another said, stunned. "How did he get brought back?" someone asked. It wasn't me, the ranger who dragged him up said. The one who brought him here is still above. I couldn't see his face. He's out there facing dozens. The three rangers exchanged looks. Then one said, You stay and tend the captain. The three of us will go up and help. No, protested the ranger who'd stayed. There are dozens of them. You'll be cut down. We can't stand by and watch a brave soldier die. One of the three seized his spear. Take a message back to Gondor. Not one of us in this squad is a coward. They emptied the last small cup of ale, clasped weapons, and one by one climbed the ladder. The stronghold's entrance creaked open. A faint iron tang of blood drifted out. A large, shadowed face peered into the passage, and a ranger at the top drew his sword. The one who hadn't yet climbed knocked an arrow. Don't get trigger-happy. He's one of us. Li Wei called down. He's the one who brought the captain back. The ranger guarding the wounded officer glanced up and explained, Where are the enemies? Li Wei pointed to an empty stretch of ground. The pursuing soldiers had been scattered and annihilated. The three rangers stared, then turned to the man who'd removed his hood and pushed back his robe to show his face. Who are you? They demanded. Li Wei, he said simply, of Roadside Fort. Greetings. For a beat, the rangers stood stunned. Then they inhaled as if struck. Recognition hit them like a hammer. They looked at each other and nodded. Forgive us, we didn't recognize you. No need for apologies. It takes guts to charge a force 10 times your size. How is our general? Someone asked, using the term they'd heard whispered. General? The rangers repeated the word in confusion, then looked to the other ranger below. He shook his head, bewildered. He's all right. A voice from the passage corrected them as the man they'd been calling Gondor General climbed the steps. I am no general, he said quietly. That's a Haradrim lie. They call me that to rouse their men. He climbed up the last few steps, steadier than he looked, and fixed Li Wei with a grateful gaze. Thank you for your help, Legend Li Wei. I owe you my life, Li Wei answered. Chapter 199, The Traitor. So it was the ranger captain. Li Wei fell silent. Judging by the way the soldiers in Harad had behaved, he'd assumed they'd captured some great Gondorian commander. Now he saw they'd been lying about the intelligence. All right, I have a rough idea of the situation. But how did you end up like that? He asked. Logically, the assault team's front line should be the most careful unit, especially the ranger captain. How could he have been taken alive? The captain hesitated. He clearly didn't want to talk about it. After a moment, he shook his head and sighed. No shame, he decided. Someone ought to know. It was the Haradrim chieftain, he said. During a standoff, he openly insulted Gondor, called us cowards, and dared our best man to a single combat in the open. I couldn't hold myself back. I stepped out of hiding. As assault leader, I failed my duty. What happened next proved how wrong I'd been. When I walked into the clearing to face him, archers suddenly appeared behind the chieftain and loosed their arrows. Then a dozen men leapt out and pinned me down. Before my men could react, they fell back. They dragged me to their camp and tortured me, trying every method to force information from me. I stayed silent until I passed out from the pain and blood loss. At that moment, I thought it was the end. The ranger captain sighed. Miracles come in the strangest ways. Only those with strong will can wait long enough to see them. Li Wei nodded inwardly. This world is a vast symphony, and many fates are set in the dark, but they are not absolute. The Creator has left a margin. A person with enough will can still break the pattern. If the captain had yielded after a few lashes, his fate might have been worse than death. A true traitor, one who renounces his country and joins his captors, might survive, but only barely. Such people never see it as mere survival. They convince themselves they made the right choice and spout hatred for their homeland to justify it. Those kinds of traitors are common, especially around Harad and Umbar. Umbar itself was founded by Gondorian turncoats and sheltered anyone hostile to Gondor. Its corsairs long harried Gondor's coasts. In Harland, though, it was usually the Haradrim who bore the grudge. Those assault teams are really cowardly. Why won't they fight us fair? 2 Haradrim soldiers were muttering as they patrolled an outpost on the north bank of the Harlan. If the ranger captain had heard them, he would have cursed. The 2 men strolled toward the adjacent camp, expecting someone to come out for the handover, but it was eerily silent. They exchanged glances. Something was wrong. They searched the tents and found no one, no bodies, no signs, nothing. Dozens of men vanished overnight. The patrol reported it at once. The news reached the chieftain. Disappeared? Some wizard's trick? He mused, frowning. Search everywhere. Scour the surroundings. Tell the fishermen to dredge the riverbed. Even if they're dead, I want their bodies. No magic makes dozens of men disappear without trace, he added with a hard edge. The order worked. That same day, intelligence returned. We found the men several miles from the camp, near the main road. From the tracks, they met a very powerful force, at least 100 cavalry. They stood no chance. 100 cavalry against a dozen guards? The chieftain slammed his fist on the table. Those Gondorians have gone too far. We must repay them in blood. But we don't know where they are, the deputy warned. The chieftain rose slowly, stared at him, and said coldly, You don't need to tell me that. Wasn't there a Gondorian noble who defected to us last month? Bring him. Soon a ragged, hollow-eyed Gondorian was dragged in. At the sight of the chieftain, he dropped to a knee, swearing fealty. My lord, I have defected sincerely. My ancestors served Castamir, king of Umbar. I have longed for this place. The chieftain arched an eyebrow. So his ancestors were traitors. How had Gondor allowed such a man near their ranks? He asked for the family name. The traitor recited an old, almost forgotten house. The chieftain had never heard of it, perhaps a minor house that fled with Umbar's founders centuries ago. He waved a hand. The imprisonment last month was a test. You passed. Now you will earn your place. I pledge my blood and loyalty, the Gondorian declared loudly. Do you remember the locations of the assault team's outposts? The chieftain asked. I do, came the reply. The traitor hesitated, then added, But those rangers are sly. They don't stay in one post long. My information may be out of date. He spoke like a true Haradrim now, ignoring the gulf of race and origin. Do their comrades know you've defected? The chieftain pressed. No, my lord. They think I was captured and tortured. They don't know I've chosen the right path. The chieftain almost laughed. Of course, they'd kept the man alive to extract information. Had it not been for today's events, he would have been dead within days. Go, get intelligence. Tell us their movements and where they are now. And once the mission is done, the chieftain added, you will be made captain of the guard. The traitor's eyes glittered with eagerness. I will not fail you. Chapter 200, An Unexpected Misstep. It's best if we stay away from here for a while. When the 4 commando members and their ranger captains stepped out of the outpost, the captain made that decision at once. The Haradrim lost dozens of soldiers here. Word won't stay buried for long. They'll send patrols to search this area. Although the Haradrim are called the barbarians of the south, their army isn't as crude as the nickname implies. If even one man goes missing, they investigate. Gondor's commandos are no different. Every soldier is tracked. Unfortunately, the captain went on, I was unconscious before we reached the Haradrim outpost on the far side of the river, so I couldn't get any useful information. They captured me with lies and a trap, Leeway added, and they took a new recruit. On the way to relocate, the captain sighed. I remember that soldier well. Even before he came here, he trained hard. He volunteered for the front lines, said he wanted to wash away his family's disgrace and prove himself. Family disgrace? Leeway's interest was piqued. The captain explained. His ancestors betrayed Gondor and followed the pirate kings of Umbar. That was over 1,000 years ago, but it stained the family name. The ones who stayed in Gondor have tried to redeem themselves. This recruit, he was one of those trying to prove his worth. He even used to ambush pirates and Haradrim with us. It should have been a warming story, but the captain's voice held regret. I shouldn't have been so hard on him that night. You had a conflict with him? Leeway asked. Yes. The captain's sigh was heavy. A month ago, I punished him severely for leaving the camp without permission to pick wild fruit at night. The very next day, during an ambush on a Haradrim squad, he was captured. We haven't heard anything about him since. The captain's pace slowed. That ambush went poorly. The Haradrim were too alert. Only our first strike worked. After that, we had to fall back. Many were wounded and are recovering in a secluded camp farther back. That's where we're headed. He forced a bitter smile. Things are unpredictable. My condolences. Li Wei tried to encourage him. Was he injured when they took him? If he's strong, with will enough, and if the Haradrim have any use for him, there's still a chance he's alive. I hope so, the captain said. When I was still in Gondor, an old man in a gray robe told me something. You can't change what's happened, but you can choose what to do afterward. Since I've returned, there's still a chance to make amends. Li Wei nodded. The conversation quieted. They followed an old road built by Gondor 1,000 years ago when Harland lay under Gondor's rule. After the road straightened, they left it to head west, and soon a small lake appeared before them. The vegetation here was richer than the surrounding dry land, an oasis of green and cool. This is a great spot, Li Wei said. He walked to the water's edge, dipped his fingers in, and felt the refreshing coolness. Where's your outpost? He asked, turning to the rangers. They were clustered beneath a slightly crooked tree, peering left and right as if expecting someone. The captain took a couple of steps toward Li Wei to answer, but Li Wei's attention snagged on something in the grass. His gaze sharpened. A faint, odd shimmer hovered over a tuft of grass, like a health bar. He pushed the grass aside. The tuft twitched, turned, and looked up with wide, innocent eyes. Li Wei jumped back. The startled movement sent him off balance. His foot sank into something hidden, and he vanished with a startled shout. The rangers drew breath in alarm and quickly slid down a rope into the opening where Li Wei had fallen. A hollow thud echoed below. Li Wei picked himself up, brushed off imaginary dust, and peered up at the new arrivals. Sorry, I should have warned you. Are you all right? I'm fine, he said, and with one of those inexplicable game-like moments, his own wounds mended, the visible scratch on his arm smoothing as if his health had refilled. He waved his hand in reassurance and looked around. This place is very well concealed. They stood in a natural sandstone chamber, roughly circular and surprisingly roomy, large enough to shelter several hundred people when packed. Above, a wide opening let in slivers of sunlight through gaps in the leaves, but the entrance was cleverly hidden by the crooked tree. Li Wei had simply fallen through a gap in its foliage. He couldn't explain his stumble and let it go. Instead, he observed the rangers more closely and finally understood the reason the Haradrim feared them. Their clothes were a mix of green and brown, shades matching tree trunks and leaves. When they stood motionless by a tree, they vanished to casual eyes. The fall had been enough to alarm them. Now, seeing one of their own, they relaxed. My captain's back alive, and this friend saved me, the captain announced, introducing Li Wei to the group. Many of you have probably heard of him, the founder of the Free City States, the Bane of Evil, the legend Li Wei. The name connected the rumors the men had heard to the man before them. One by one, they saluted. Li Wei inclined his head. The Athelian commandos were an impressive sight, tall, fair-skinned men with dark hair and gray eyes, faces proud and lined with sorrow. Swords hung at their sides. Many carried long spears with broad heads or great bows nearly as tall as a man. Their quivers were filled with long arrows fletched in green. Their garments ranged through greens and browns, so they would be less visible moving through woodlands. Green arm guards and gloves, hoods and masks left only bright, watchful eyes exposed, silent, lethal guardians of the borderlands.